Today's episode is proudly sponsored by English Learning for Curious Minds. English Learning for Curious Minds is one of the best podcasts for English learners right now. Like Thinking in English, English Learning for Curious Minds is based on the idea of learning English from fascinating stories and topics. Recent episodes have discussed the unusual lives of historical kings and queens of England, the amazing stories behind famous authors including Lewis Carroll, introductions to historical events, and even a detailed explanation of English grammar through the topic of turnips. It really is an amazing podcast. I recommend you all go over and listen to a few episodes. You can improve your English listening skills and also access unique, interactive transcripts, subtitles, and key vocabulary. Make sure you check out English Learning for Curious Minds, available on all podcast platforms right now. Hello, I'm Tom Wilkinson, and welcome to the Thinking in English podcast, a podcast for intermediate to advanced level English learners. Today, I want to introduce to you the ancient and influential philosophy of Stoicism, and explain how its teachings could be useful and beneficial to your English learning journey. You can find the full transcript of today's episode for free over on the Thinking in English blog. Check out my YouTube and Instagram pages, both linked in the description below. Join my conversation club for bonus episodes and weekly conversation practice, link in the description as well. And here is today's episode. 2,000 years ago, one of the greatest and most powerful Roman emperors spent his spare time writing thoughts and ideas in his private diary. Years before him, a former slave won his freedom, became an influential teacher, and his lectures became well known in ancient Rome. And at a similar time, a Roman playwright exchanged letters with his acquaintances discussing issues of philosophy. These three sources, an emperor's diary, a former slave's lectures, and a playwright's letters, contain an immense amount of wisdom and knowledge. They form the basis of Stoicism, a philosophy that has informed the actions of great leaders, and still today is popular and well known. Now, you may be asking, what relevance does Stoicism have for English learners? And this is what I want to talk about today. I've loved reading philosophy for years. If you are a Patreon subscriber, you may have watched my bookcase tour I uploaded last week. You can subscribe from just $5 a month if you're interested. And if you did watch that video, you would have noticed all of the philosophy books that I have read and collected and store on my bookcase. It has been a big part of my life, and I have always found philosophy to be incredibly beneficial. It's a beneficial part of my life. Recently, I realized that a lot of the famous lessons and ideas in the philosophy of Stoicism, in particular, could be useful for language learners. So, using a number of famous quotes from the great Stoic philosophers of ancient Rome, I hope I can give you all some interesting tips and advice to make the most of your learning, and at the same time, maybe introduce you to some of the key ideas of Stoicism. Let's start at the beginning. What is Stoicism? Who are the great Stoic philosophers, and what do they believe? Well, Stoicism is a philosophical school that originated in ancient Greece and became influential in the Roman Empire. It was founded by the philosopher Zeno of Citium in the early 3rd century BC, and was later developed by other philosophers, including Epictetus, Seneca, and Marcus Aurelius. Marcus Aurelius is known as the greatest Roman emperor, and one of the greatest leaders in history. He was not born as a future emperor, but as a child, he was selected by the Emperor Hadrian and trained to be the future leader of Rome. His rule was informed by the principles of wisdom and virtue, and we'll come back to these words later, as they often appear in Stoic writings. Seneca the Younger, the son of a wealthy and famous writer, was tutored by a Stoic teacher as a child, and became committed to the ideas of self-improvement. He is known as a letter writer, and also was the tutor of the infamous Emperor Nero. And Epictetus had a very different background to the other Stoic philosophers. He was not the son of a great writer or a future emperor. Instead, he was born a slave. His life was hard and painful. His master once broke his leg and permanently disabled him. But after gaining his freedom in his 30s, Epictetus dedicated his life to philosophy. At its core, Stoicism is a philosophy of personal ethics and a practical guide for living a good life. It teaches that the key to happiness and well-being lies in developing inner strength, wisdom, and virtue. Stoics believe that humans have the capacity or the ability to use reason and logic to overcome our negative emotions and negative impulses, and to live in accordance with nature and universal principles. Stoicism is often associated with its emphasis on self-control, rationality, and detachment from external circumstances. It teaches that we should focus on what we can control and accept what we cannot control. Stoics also emphasize the importance of living now, living in the present moment, gratitude, and developing a sense of purpose and meaning in life. In modern times, Stoicism has experienced a resurgence of interest, as it's a practical philosophy for dealing with the challenges of everyday life. Its teachings have been applied in a wide range of fields, including business, sports, psychology, and education. In the context of language learning, the Stoic approach can be a useful framework for developing the discipline, resilience, and inner strength needed to master a new language like English. According to the Stoics, learning is not just about acquiring knowledge or skills, but also about cultivating virtue and wisdom. They believe that true learning requires a deep understanding of oneself and the world around us. The Stoics emphasize the importance of critical thinking and rationality in learning, as well as the need to have a sense of humility and openness to new ideas. The Stoic approach to learning also emphasizes the importance of practice and repetition. According to the Stoics, true mastery of a skill requires long-term effort and practice over time. They believe that success in learning depends on a combination of natural ability, hard work, and persistence. One of the key tenets of the Stoic approach to language learning, or to learning, is the idea that we should focus on what is within our control and let go of what is outside our control. In the context of language learning, this means focusing on the aspects of language that we can control, such as our own effort and our own attitude, rather than worrying about external factors, such as the difficulty of the language or the proficiency of other learners. Focus on what's important or what's possible for you to change. You can't change how difficult English is, but you can change how much work you put in. Overall, the Stoic approach to learning emphasizes the importance of discipline, focus, and perseverance in achieving mastery. It encourages learners to cultivate a sense of humility, rationality, and mindfulness in their learning journey. By adopting a Stoic approach to learning, English learners can develop the habits and attitudes necessary to achieve success in their studies, while also cultivating a sense of inner peace and tranquility. So now I've talked about language learning, and Stoicism. I thought I'd give you some examples. I want to read a few famous quotes from Stoic philosophers and explain how they are relevant to us today as language learners. So, quote number 1. How long can you afford to put off who you really want to be? Your nobler self cannot wait any longer. Decide to be extraordinary and do what you need to do now. I find a lot of motivation and inspiration in this quote from Epictetus. He believed that inside of us all is our nobler self, a version of us that is actualized and at full potential. We usually think of our nobler self as being far away in the future, as something maybe we will spend our whole life working towards. Epictetus and the Stoics, however, believe that your noble self is already here. Stop waiting, do what you need to do now, and decide to be extraordinary. There are a few lessons for English learners here. First, don't procrastinate. I've recorded a whole episode on procrastination before, and it's a big problem for every single language learner, including me. If you've been thinking about starting to study English again, or taking an English class, or joining my conversation club, do it now. Don't wait or procrastinate, as it's not helping you to study. Second, being extraordinary is a choice. You can decide to be extraordinary. It's up to you, and it's not your natural talent or skills, but it's you who decides whether you can learn English. You can make that choice to improve, to work hard, and to study. No one else or nothing else can. Quote number 2. If you want to improve, be content to be thought foolish and stupid. In other words, don't be scared or embarrassed if you want to improve. I used to teach junior high school English in Japan, and so many of the students were terrified of making mistakes or being wrong. But to learn a language and to improve any skill, you need to accept and embrace mistakes and errors. As Epictetus says, you need to be content to be thought foolish and stupid. The Stoic philosophers believe that the fear of making mistakes is irrational. I know how concerning it can be to make mistakes in a foreign language. I've made thousands of mistakes in Japanese and Chinese. However, the reality is that people don't generally care about your mistakes. Either people won't notice, they won't care, or they'll give you useful and beneficial feedback. Once you understand that mistakes are not bad, but they are useful and essential, it makes language learning so much nicer and easier. Quote number 3. The key is to keep company only with people who uplift you, whose presence calls forth your best. This quote, also from Epictetus, means you should surround yourself with people who will help you to achieve your goals, to be your best self, your noble self. I think this is a really important part of language learning. Build a community or network of people who will help you to learn English, give you inspiration, and keep your motivation high. Perhaps this is just following people on Instagram or Twitter or Facebook, social media, other people who, perhaps students who post their language learning goals, or English teachers or content makers who can give you motivation and make you better. This is one of the big reasons I started a Patreon and Discord subscription service. There are now hundreds of Thinking in English listeners interacting and talking every day. They organize study groups, discussion times, and share tips and advice with each other all of the time. They talk about my podcasts, but more than that, they talk about cultures and foods, all in English. We have chats on movies, on current events, and sharing advice and tips. In fact, as I'm writing this episode, I received a message from one subscriber saying she wants to organize a session on Monday, so the day this is being released, so that my members can share their study tips and goals. Having this kind of community is essential. You can learn from each other, push each other, and hold each other accountable. Learning a language can sometimes be lonely, especially if you don't know anyone else also learning the language. But it doesn't have to be. Find company who will uplift you. This can be on social media, or it can be with Thinking in English. Because for just $10 a month, you can join my Discord server and join conversations in English with other listeners every day. Quote number 4. If a man knows not to which port he sails, no wind is favourable. This quote comes from Seneca. If a man knows not to which port he sails, no wind is favourable. What does this mean? Well, if you don't know what your goal or target is, you are not going to know the best way to achieve these goals. Right? If you don't know where you're going, where your boat is sailing to, which port you sail to, it doesn't matter which direction the wind is blowing, you have no idea how to get to your goal. At the beginning of this year, I wrote a guide to New Year's resolutions, and this was the key point to that episode. You need to have a target or a goal, and a specific target or goal, to make the most of your study efforts. Studying becomes much easier if you have a tangible and real goal that is important to you. Perhaps taking an exam, having conversations in English, or traveling to a new country. Just because something is hard to master, do not think of it as humanly impossible. But if a thing is humanly possible, consider it within your reach. This is the final quote I want to highlight, and it comes from the great Marcus Aurelius. Sometimes studying English and becoming fluent seems impossible. This is not true. Learning a language is possible. It's not impossible. It is possible. I've interviewed people on Thinking in English before who have reached really high levels of English proficiency. If they can do it, if they've managed to do it, so can you. Don't think of studying a language or studying English as an impossible task. Think of it as within your reach. Think of learning English as something you can do. Now, I've introduced some of those famous quotes from the great Stoic philosophers, but let me give you a few more direct tips and advice. Right? Tip number 1, develop self-discipline. The Stoic approach emphasizes the importance of self-discipline in achieving mastery. For English learners, this means setting realistic goals, developing study habits, and sticking to regular practice schedules. 2. Focus on what is within your control. As mentioned earlier, the Stoic approach focuses on the importance of what is within your control and letting go of what is outside of your control. This means focusing on your own efforts and attitudes, rather than worrying about external factors, such as the difficulty of the language or the proficiency of other learners. Cultivate a growth mindset. Stoicism emphasizes the importance of personal growth and self-improvement. This means adopting a growth mindset, which involves seeing mistakes and setbacks as opportunities for learning and growth, not sources of frustration and discouragement. Change your way of thinking so that you're only thinking about getting better. Develop mindfulness and focus. Stoic philosophers believed in mindfulness and focus. Develop techniques for staying present and focused during your language studies, such as deep breathing, meditation, or other mindfulness practices. And finally, have a sense of inner peace and tranquility. The Stoics were big advocates of inner peace, even in the face of external challenges or obstacles. For English learners, this means developing techniques for managing stress, anxiety, or frustration during your language studies. Perhaps this is journaling, mindfulness practice, or any other relaxation technique. So here is today's final thought. Rather than a detailed explanation of Stoic philosophy, this episode has aimed to take some of the key teachings and lessons from the ancient traditions and apply them to learning English. Stoicism as a philosophy was concerned with self-improvement and the idea that individuals have the ability to take control of their lives. Hopefully, some of the lessons I've talked about today can inspire you to make changes in your study routine. Are you like me, and do you like reading philosophy? Let me know, who is your favourite philosopher? What is your favourite school of philosophy? I'm interested, and if you reach out, maybe I can do episodes on different schools of philosophy and their advice and tips for learning and language learning. If you enjoyed listening to this episode, let me know. Leave a rating on Spotify, leave a rating on Apple. I've been getting lots of Apple reviews recently, which is amazing. Please go and leave me an Apple review. Every day at about 6 p.m. I get an email from a tracking service, and the first thing in the email is all the Apple reviews I've got for the day. So every time I see I've got an Apple podcast review, it makes me so happy. And Spotify is amazing. Over 5,000 5-star ratings. Next stop, 10,000. That's my goal. By the end of this year, I want 10,000 5-star Spotify ratings. So if you've not rated me on Spotify, do it now. If you enjoy thinking in English and you want to support me, support the podcast, help the podcast grow and let me do this full time, please consider supporting me on Patreon. Why? Conversation clubs. We have 6 conversation clubs taking place every week. You join the conversation clubs, you join the Patreon for $10 a month, just $10 a month. You can join as many conversation clubs as you want. We discuss different topics every week, either a grammar-based topic or a current event or debate-based topic. We make questions, we make model answers, we make vocabulary lists, and you can meet English learners, thinking and English listeners from around the world, right? Please join our conversation clubs. You also have access to study groups. You have bonus episodes. You have chat rooms. You have extra resources. And you can talk to English teachers pretty much all the time. We're always on Discord helping people and giving advice. So please consider joining the Thinking in English Conversation Club and Patreon. Without my Patreon subscribers, Thinking in English would not be able to continue, right? Without those guys, would not be able to continue. So please go and subscribe. If you don't want to subscribe, if you don't want to subscribe for conversation clubs, you can also donate to me one time. In the description, there's a link to buy me a coffee. Coffee, I love coffee. I drink a lot of coffee. And if you go and donate to buy me a coffee, I will actually go and buy a coffee with your donations. I can honestly say that. I know a lot of people who ask you to buy coffees, don't buy them, but I do. So every time someone donates to me, I go to the coffee shop and I buy a coffee. So please, if you want to buy me a coffee, there's a link in the description as well. And check out my YouTube channel, check out Instagram, and yeah, Thinking English classes as well, if you're interested in English classes. Yeah, lots of stuff. So, thank you for listening, and I'll see you next time. Goodbye. Join the Thinking in English Conversation Club right now. For just $2 a week, you can join with other English learners, practice speaking, have conversations, enjoy yourself, and use new vocabulary. We run conversation clubs every Tuesday and Thursday at 12 p.m, 6 p.m, and 9 p.m. UK time. So there's no excuse. You can join, and you should join right now. Join the Thinking in English Conversation Club, link in the description.